Hello everyone and welcome. In this video, we will see how to plan the migration of PostgreSQL Server deployments to Azure with Azure Migrate. With Azure Migrate, you can discover and assess PostgreSQL instances for migration to Azure Database for PostgreSQL and Azure VM. Specifically talking in terms of enabling migration and modernization of PostgreSQL workloads, with the new Azure PostgreSQL assessment capability, you can understand readiness and blockers to migration, recommended target Azure service and right-sized SKU, as well as the reasoning behind the recommendation. You can also identify cost estimates of running your PostgreSQL Server deployments on Azure, as well as migration guidance. That is, the steps you need to perform to be able to migrate using the recommended approach. Before you assess and effectively plan migration of PostgreSQL Server deployments to Azure, you must ensure that all prerequisites for the successful discovery of PostgreSQL Server are met, and all discovery issues are resolved. To learn more about the prerequisites, visit aka.ms/azuremigrate/PostgreSQL discovery. Once discovery is successfully completed, you can navigate to the database's blade to initiate a PostgreSQL assessment. You can select the PostgreSQL instances that you want to assess and click on Create Assessment. While creating an assessment, you can specify properties for Azure Target, such as target region for migration, default environment type of source workload, that is dev test or prod, such that appropriate pricing and SKU can be applied. Currency, savings options such as pay-as-you-go, 1 or 3-year reserved instance, or Azure Savings Plan, and assessment criteria. You can also indicate if you want to bring your own Windows server or selected Linux server license to Azure with Azure Hybrid Benefit when migrating to Azure VM. By clicking on Edit Defaults, you can specify the target service tier to indicate which Azure PostgreSQL offering you would like to leverage, or you can leave them to their default values to let Azure Migrate decide what is best for you. After specifying all the details, you can click on Review and Create Assessment. If all looks good, you can click on Create. The assessment is ready for review within a few minutes. You can see that we have assessed 13 servers and 17 instances. Further, we can see that several of our instances are either out of support or nearing end of support. Additionally, our discovery success is 100%. You can view the readiness for different migration approaches for PostgreSQL Server instances and databases, as well as the estimated cost for running those workloads in Azure. You can choose to dive deeper into reports targeted at respective PostgreSQL deployment targets in Azure, such as Azure Database for PostgreSQL, or refer the summarized recommended report. The recommended report indicates the most efficient way of migrating your PostgreSQL Server deployments to Azure based on the selected migration preference. Azure Migrate considers both the migration readiness and the estimated cost such that no PostgreSQL deployments are left behind, even those that haven't been discovered completely. In this case, it is recommending, based on our intent to modernize, that we replatform 13 PostgreSQL Server instances to PaaS and rehost 2 of them to IaaS. Going deeper, I can see that the PaaS service being recommended is Azure Database for PostgreSQL Flexible Server and IaaS service is Azure VM. Now, let's look at the details of the assessment for AirSonic Backend 5432 on AirSonic Backend, which is a PostgreSQL instance and represents the data layer for an app I am interested in modernizing. We can see that it is ready with conditions for migration to Azure Database for PostgreSQL, and the recommended target is Azure Database for PostgreSQL, given the intent to modernize specified earlier. The recommended configuration includes general purpose, V4 series, 8 vCores, 32 GB memory from compute standpoint, and 128 GB of premium SSD storage, which costs $237. Additionally, we can go deeper to view aggregated performance statistics such as allocated cores, CPU utilization, memory in use, etc. The Readiness tab helps understand the readiness for all PostgreSQL targets on Azure. To understand issues for modernization to Azure Database for PostgreSQL, we can see that we will have to address a few issues. In this case, we can just provide the required permissions for comprehensive database readiness evaluation. The Target Recommendations tab explains how the ideal target was determined. In this case, the PostgreSQL server was ready for Azure Database for PostgreSQL. Additionally, the cost of running this instance on Azure Database for PostgreSQL is estimated to be the lowest among the two. We can see that the recommended tool for the job is Migration Service for Azure Database for PostgreSQL. Azure Migrate's recommendations have got us covered even when we didn't have the right credentials or permissions to discover the PostgreSQL deployment accurately, so that we don't leave any PostgreSQL deployment behind. Now let's explore directional reports for respective targets, especially the PaaS ones, since they are operationally cost-effective to run and maintain. Jumping to the Azure Database for PostgreSQL Only Readiness Report, we can identify that 13 instances out of 17 instances are either ready or ready with conditions for migration to Azure Database for PostgreSQL. We can see that MySQL Linux App 5, 5432 on MySQL Linux App 5 is marked as unknown for Azure Database for PostgreSQL, since system resource metrics couldn't be determined due to insufficient permissions. We can see that we have a workaround that we can adopt if we are interested in migrating this instance to Azure Database for PostgreSQL. You can see that Azure Migrate provides a dedicated assessment reports for PostgreSQL Server on Azure VM, which is targeted at a lift and shift or replication-based approach for migrating to Azure VM with least effort. You can review the compute and storage cost distribution for migrating to Azure Database for PostgreSQL or PostgreSQL Server on Azure VM. At any moment, you can go to Settings and customize the assessment by changing selections for reserved capacity, migration strategy, Azure Hybrid Benefit, etc., to see how the cost varies and choose the combination that works best. Additionally, you can export the assessment report for sharing or offline consumption. This demo covers everything that we have in Azure Migrate to help you discover and assess your PostgreSQL Server instances and databases at scale. We've included Azure PostgreSQL Assessment Creation and its various options, Azure PostgreSQL Deployment Target and right-size SKU recommendations, and associated reasoning and migration guidance, as well as cost details to make it easier for you to start prioritizing your data migrations with Azure Migrate. As you get started, you can leverage the resources on this screen, such as the Azure Migrate documentation. Once discovery and assessment are completed, and you have built a high-confidence migration plan, you can leverage Migration Service for Azure Database for PostgreSQL for migrating PostgreSQL instances to Azure Database for PostgreSQL. Or use Azure Migrate's server migration capability to lift and shift your servers to Azure virtual machines. You can even perform a test migration without impacting our production workloads before the actual migration. Thank you for watching this video.